open this forum.
I mean, there is. I'll just quickly add something there, which is that there is a University of California, Berkeley Labor Center study that came out a few months ago. That points to the fact that if Proposition 22 passes, then you might see wages for gig workers such as Uber drivers going all the way down to even $5 or $6 an hour.
Yeah.
So this is a Berkeley study that came out just a few months ago.
Raj?
So yeah, Biju, I wanted to ask, like, why are we proceeding with this electoral? Is there no legal precedence to use in such a scenario? As you mentioned, there is something that the court has already said. So why not approach it legally? Like, what are relative chances of success in each?
So the cycle of the way policy gets created in many states, including California, where there is this option of ballot initiative, is that the legislature can make a move to create new policy frameworks through legislation. The court systems can, while in the process of ruling on any particular specific case, end up producing a policy direction. And if a court system manages to produce that, then it is imperative, it is required that the legislature adjust its laws to accommodate for that. And so that's what AB 5 was. So once AB 5 was passed, Uber had two options: either to try and go back to court on AB 5 with picking on some specific aspect of AB 5 that is not directly connected to the dynamics decision. Because if they picked on the core part of it, then the dynamics decision, which is a California Supreme Court verdict, would hold. And so it would be very difficult to overturn that. So they would have to pick on some aspect of AB 5 to challenge it. And the other option they had was, of course, to go for the ballot proposition. Because ballot proposition is the one thing, a ballot initiative is one thing that is seen as a direct democracy form, a referendum that can overturn anything that the legislature does for sure. And so, Uber just weighed its options. It realized it really didn't have too many options vis-a-vis the law, because note that the dynamics decision is not a California lower court decision, it's a California Supreme Court decision. And in as much as labor law is what one would call on there is labor law is enacted both at the state level, that is, every state has an independent right to enact its own labor standards, and there is a federal labor standard that's enacted by federal government. In as much as it's on the combined list, on what in India we would call the concurrent list, California has an absolute right to pass its own labor standards. And that's what the dynamics decision essentially did, because it is a California Supreme Court. So you can't challenge it, because the ruling was made through California law, not through federal law, right? So it was an unchallengeable decision legally, right? And that's why, it had to go to the legislature, and they tried their best, even with the legislator, to move AB 5 in their favor, but they failed because of groups like Rideshare Drivers United. The level of mobilization that Rideshare Drivers United and all of us globally managed to produce was so phenomenal that AB 5 held and it passed. And once that happened, the only real way forward for Uber was to go through a ballot measure.
Okay, thank you, Biju. Anyone else? You can unmute yourself, or you can put your name. I can unmute you. So the argument on the yes side, Biju, I heard the one of the argument on the no side, when I read this, they're saying they're not giving social security. They are not, the drivers not getting the social security or a medical or any other protection that normal employees in a company gets it, right? But I also read some of the argument from the yes side. They saying that Uber going to give this or Uber giving this. Is that true or no? That's Uber giving, even though they are the part-time workers, I mean part-time drivers, does Uber or this company is giving any benefit like regular employees? I would say like I will pay like 10% or like whatever, some money for your IRA account, something like that.
Okay.
What benefit
So
basically
I think
the drivers get?
Yeah. I get your question. It is literally, there are two things that Uber and Lyft are using to drive to try and drive towards a yes vote. And one of this is what you just said, because, so here is how, I mean, but to answer your question, I need to make a distinction between full-time versus part-time and that stuff. See, there is nothing in AB5 that says that if you're a part-time worker, you're not eligible for regular employee benefits. You just get it based on your part-time job, right? In the sense that if California minimum wage is whatever it is right now, $15 it is, then even if you're working only 20 hours a week or 15 hours a week, you're entitled, all this law AB5 says is that you're entitled to do that. And if AB5 says that you are entitled to, let's say, workman's comp and social security payments, then you'll be entitled to that. Even if you're a part-time worker, you're entitled to, let's say you're working 15 hours a week, you'll be entitled to the 15-hour equivalent of that, right? So there is nothing in AB5 that says that it will stop part-time work. Part-time work with the protection of employee status, that is, every Uber, Lyft, DoorDash driver in California, whether full-time or part-time, will be treated as an employee. If you're a full-timer, then you'll be a full-time employee. If you're a part-timer, you'll be a part-time employee. So one is there should be no confusion that AB5 grants employee status for everybody, whether it's full-time or part-time, and it just ties into a long history in the United States where part-time employment has been covered. I mean, you go to a fast food joint, you know, a lot of young people who work in McDonald's or, you know, whatever, Burger Kings, they are employees. And many of them don't work all 40 hours a week. They work 10 hours, 15 hours, 20 hours. But they are entitled to minimum wage, right? So I think, I mean, we really need to be very clear. A lot of Walmart employees work only part-time. But they're entitled, because they're employees, they're entitled to all the benefits that accrue to an employee. What Uber wants to do is to hold drivers as independent contractors so that it does not have to guarantee minimum wage, so that it doesn't have to guarantee, so that it doesn't have to pay for workman's comp, so that it doesn't have to pay for unemployment insurance. Let me just, I mean, right now what's happening in California, for instance, let me just tell you, right, and in New York, is that Uber drivers in California are entitled to unemployment insurance under conditions of COVID. They're entitled to unemployment insurance because they're employees under AB5, right? And when a person is an employee, the company is supposed to pay into the unemployment insurance fund, right? Every month, as part, just like every one of your employees pays into Social Security, etc., they also have to pay into the unemployment insurance fund of the state of California, and in New York, to the state of New York, right? What they have done essentially is, even though AB5 came into effect on January 1st, 2020, they have not paid a single penny into the unemployment insurance fund in California. And because they're insisting that everything is not decided, we are still fighting this fight, ballot Proposition 22 is still alive, through the period of COVID, they tried their best not to pay a single California driver they tried their best to maybe not cooperate with the unemployment insurance process. And, you know, so that is what Uber and Lyft are trying. So the state attorney general, again, along with 3 other district attorneys, had to go to court to force Uber and Lyft to start paying into the unemployment insurance fund, etc. In New York, it's the exact same thing. We won a case, the Taxi Workers Alliance won a case against Uber back in 2018, where every Uber Lyft driver in New York State is entitled to unemployment insurance, right? They would have been getting $504 per week through the period of COVID that they were not able to work. But Uber and Lyft refused to share that data with the Department of Labor. And the Department of Labor, Kumo is in Uber's pocket. And so, again, they did not push. And in the end, what happened was that a lot of Uber drivers are not getting any money. They're being forced to apply for federal assistance and get $184 when they were actually entitled to $504. So the Taxi Workers Alliance, we had to go and file a case against Governor Kumo, against the Labor Commissioner and the Department of Labor, and the judge gave a temporary injunction, as a result of which in New York right now, Uber drivers are being paid the difference of what they've been owed from March to now, right? So that's a huge victory that we just won a few weeks ago, right? So also in California. So I think the point simply is that Uber is desperate to maintain drivers as independent contractors so that they don't have to pay any of this. Now, knowing that they are losing this fight, what they are throwing out there is this whole sob story, this victim story, saying that our business model is this, our business model is that, we are trying to keep rides cheap for passengers, and therefore we cannot afford to have all these drivers as employees, and they are offering what's called a third category. That is, we'll give a little bit of some of these benefits. Let's legislate and create a third category between independent contractor and employee. Let's create a third category of workers who are not pure independent contractors, but are certainly not employees. And we'll give them a few things, like we'll give them some contributions towards their healthcare. We'll contribute something to workman's comp, right? So that's what they're trying, right? Because they're trying to find some way of still maintaining their super profits and create this. But the problem is exactly the same. That is, if Proposition 22 fails and AB5 falls for these companies, then every other company, software companies to every other company, is going to try and meet that script, right? Now, if a third category of worker goes through, the same thing happens. Everybody from Walmart to Cisco is going to go in that direction, and they say, okay, all our workers are no longer employees, they're all third category workers.
Right.
And
exactly.
so we're all going to get
going
through.
to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, another argument I heard, if no one have a question, so I can go for it. Anyone has a question?
Yeah, can I just ask a quick, this is not a quick question. It might be like too vague a question, but
Introduce
I'm just
yourself. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Vagisha. A student. But my question is that, what do you think, BIJU, a Biden presidency would entail for the labor movement?
Hi, Vagisha. That's a fairly complicated question, but Biden has come out openly against Proposition 22. So to start with, let's underscore that. Biden's very clear, Proposition 22 needs to be defeated. He's very clear that AB5 needs to hold, right? So now if I take that as my departure point, then overall, we might see an interesting kind of, let's say from anything is an improvement from the Trump situation. So we might see a swing back wherein some attention is paid to labor rights, right? But Biden has an interesting political history. Biden comes right now, he comes out of the neoliberal camp of the Democratic Party, right? Obama, Clinton's, etc. One way of breaking up the Democratic Party is to break it up into three parts. One is the left inside the Democratic Party, represented by Sanders and AOC, etc. Then there are the old Keynesians, that is the people who really built the Democratic Party up between the 50s and the 70s, right? And that's people actually like Biden. Biden is an original Keynesian within the Democratic Party. So is people like somebody like Elizabeth Warren, right? And then there are the neoliberals, which is the Clintons and the Obamas, et cetera, et cetera. Right? But the thing is that Biden moved to the neoliberal camp over the last 10 years, 15 years. And so that is the worry. But there are certain things that's assured, right? I mean, if Biden comes in, we'll get a better National Labor Relations Bureau chief. The General Counsel of the National Labor Relations Bureau has an enormous amount of power, right? If AB5 holds, one of the ways that California unions can go is that they one of the quickest ways to getting collective bargaining and creating a collective bargaining unit would be to go to the National Labor Relations Board and get certification, come back and run an election in Uber, right? But right now, nobody wants to go to the National Labor Relations Bureau because National Labor Relations Board because of the fact that it's a Trump appointee who's crazy, who would support Uber. If a Biden wins, then you will have those kinds of things that will happen. The larger question, however, is apart from these small shifts, or let's say standard Democratic Party shifts, like you put a more labor-friendly person in charge of the National Labor Relations Board, you put a more consumer-friendly person in charge of the FCC, right? And apart from these standard things that the Democrats do, the larger question is, have people like Biden come to recognize the crisis of the American workforce?
Yeah.
And there, I would say the signals are mixed. I mean, in the sense that, I mean, there are ways in which they cannot but see the crisis of the American workforce, right? But at the same time, they are so deeply entrenched within the neoliberal camp that they're going to struggle to, try and figure out a way to get past their paymasters, right? So that's going to be the struggle. But I'm sure, I mean, the good news again is that we have now a resurgent, fragmented, and very diverse, but a resurgent left in the United States. And as long as that resurgent left is able to find ways of creating that structure within the Democratic Party that they can hold on to and keep twisting, I think we can only advance the struggle. The problem will be how fast can we advance the struggle. I don't know whether that answers your question, Vagisha.
Yeah. I have a bunch of follow-up questions, but I'll leave the state. I mean, if anyone else wants to go and ask questions.
Okay. Anybody else has a question? Okay. I will ask a simple question from a common man perspective. So I order food DoorDash, right? I sit in my home couch and I want something, I order DoorDash, it's get delivered, okay? Then the DoorDash saying that, okay, so we will go out of business, or Uber says we will go out of business if yes did not pass. Yes on 22 did not pass. So is that really true? Will this company go bankrupt? Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash, all these app companies. So what you want to tell to the common people who think that the Uber should win this case, Uber or this guy should win this case? What do you want to say to these people?
I understand that consumer tension. I mean, and I understand the consumer tension from the point of view of consumers who are struggling, right? I mean, remember what I said early on, that we are living in a country where wages have remained stagnant for 50 years. So, it may or may not be the case with you specifically as an individual, but large numbers of people are really struggling to make their ends meet. So now, if they are going to say that they now have a new service, which is DoorDash or Uber, and that's fairly cheap, and if somebody tells them that that's no longer going to be cheap, that's going to be costlier, then they're going to be worried. Or rather, if they say it's going to go out of business, then what do we do, right? I mean, they're working 4 jobs, so they need DoorDash to deliver food. See, that's what you call a kind of a scaremongering tactic, right? It's fear. It's the production of fear. And that's the same thing as saying there's a terrorist in your backyard, right? I mean, not in the same sense, but it's the same logic. You try and scare people. in a particular direction. But let's look at it very differently. Let's look at it rationally, right? So when I ask anybody who's an ordinary person, what is the Uber business model or what's the DoorDash business model? Their first answer is, oh my God, it's so convenient. It's all in an app on a phone, right? Everybody thinks the innovation in this thing is the app. A really, really fluid workflow created and therefore a service delivered through an app. That is the innovation. The real truth is that the innovation is the business model of what I call the bottom feeder business model, right? Now, one way of thinking about this is that if Proposition 22 is defeated and we win, then it is possible that Uber, quote unquote, might go out of business. It is possible, right? I don't want to act as if that's not a possibility. I have no idea is the more correct answer, right? But the point is the technology is not going anywhere. The technology is here to stay. There's nothing called Uber going out of business or DoorDash going out of business and everything just evaporating. No, DoorDash going out of business means somebody else will come up and buy up DoorDash and reinvent the business model wherein they'll push up prices for the consumer by, let's say, 10% or 15%, and try and accommodate wherein workers can be paid minimum wage, etc., right? That's what's really the forward-moving path, right? The other important thing is that the other really important thing to think about is that there is a company that's just come out of Texas called Alto, which is saying we have no problem. We will provide W-2 based services, right? So, maybe there are companies that have already figured out how to do an employee-based model in this business. And finally, I would say that we really need to think about these things, in terms of a municipal solution. And this is where I'm going to miss Veena, because Veena and I have been in a long conversation about what we call a Green New Deal for the transportation sector, right? Which is, we've got to stop doing this, right? We've got to stop putting 100,000 cars on the street just because we are interested in convenience, right? We've got to find a more efficient model of urban transport. And that more efficient model will involve what I'm calling a municipal app, right? Wherein every service worker will have an app, right? That everybody can download, and it's a municipal app. And then you can have drivers or workers, let's say maybe even getting organized as co-ops or small businesses, etc., right? Some structure like that, right? Wherein you produce a better, a more efficient structure, rather than every company using the fact that lots and lots of our drivers are underemployed, lots and lots of human beings are underemployed, throwing hundreds and hundreds of workers, thousands of workers onto the streets in their private cars, onto the streets, and thereby, creating both a kind of a traffic and an environmental and, economic nightmare. So I think there's nothing called DoorDash going out of business. There's nothing called Uber going out of business. Those specific captains of capital that are currently controlling the company may have to exit because they lost the bloody fight. That's all, right?
Yeah.
And then somebody else will come, buy up the technology and move things forward.
Right. The technology is going to go there. That's going to be the future. So that's not, as I said, is not going to go away anytime soon. Yeah. So only the companies
no part
will change
of this
their
fight
name.
that's an anti-technology fight. It's not.
Right. Correct. So we are not against technology, right? Okay.
Why would we be? Every Uber driver also uses Uber at another end on his phone, right?
Yeah, I've seen some people commenting like, oh, you guys don't want this app. You guys don't want this food delivered by DoorDash or Uber, and you don't want this facility, you want this company going. So now it makes sense, right? So the technology going to be here. Okay. And then, so we are hitting a 7 o'clock hour now.
Just one small question, Kanak.
Yeah, go ahead. So just want to wrap up this. So Nalan, just wait one more minute. So Biju, so after Nalan, so you can conclude this talk.
I would say because Vagisha said she had more questions, let Nalan ask a question
Yeah,
and
okay.
Vagisha ask a question. Let
Sure.
both of them ask a question. I will respond to both and we'll conclude.
Conclude. Okay. And
you.
yeah, also just to mention Veena, I forgot to mention this. So I appreciate if everyone pray for Veena's brother, safe return. He went on trial last week. He did not return. So pray for that. And then another thing also, I want to give an announcement, like we did a similar one for yes on Prop 16. It's basically bringing the affirmative action back in California after 23 years. So we already completed 2 sessions on it, and then videos available in our AKC YouTube channel. You can go and view. And with that said, Nalan, go ahead and ask your question quickly, then the next person go after that.
So I had a discussion regarding this topic with someone. They say that the companies are the one giving jobs to people, and so many people, unskilled labor. The Uber and Lyft are giving jobs to people. If they shut down, where will they go? So you should be happy that they are giving off jobbing people, although they are struggling. Yet they're giving a job for unskilled laborers, which is the mass market. So what do you say for that?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, actually, Vagisha, why don't you also go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, so that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah. Sorry. So I wanted to ask, I'm trying to pick which question. Maybe, so BIJU, just another vague question. Where, I mean, like you said, under neoliberalism, of course, the labor movement has taken a huge hit, right? Where exactly do you see us to be in the labor movement right now at this point in time? Like, do you take hope in new projects like, I know the DSA and United Electrical Workers just launched a labor organizing movement, and taking inspiration from them. In Canada, we launched a similar project. So how do you make sense of all of that in this current moment?
Terrific. All right, so let me start with Nalan's question and then go on to Vagisha's. So Nalan, absolutely, anybody who says, but Uber is giving jobs to a lot of people, let them give the job to a lot of people. Nobody's saying, a lot of people who want to make that extra $200 in a week. Nobody's saying, see, this is the whole thing. Uber confuses the whole situation by saying flexibility will go away, one. Second, Uber confuses the whole thing by saying that we'll have to shut down a lot of the drivers. That is, we'll have to reduce the number of drivers, right? So very simply, the first argument, that is, part-time workers need flexibility, is a complete scare tactic again, because there's absolutely nothing in the law that prevents flexible work scheduling, right? And there's absolutely nothing in the law that says that you cannot employ more than a certain number of people, right? So on both those counts, there's no reason for Uber to be that person, whoever you're talking to be saying that, what will happen. That the whole thing is premised on what happens if Uber shuts down, right? And I think there is the peculiar kind of logic of that most of us who are not used to how capital works think. We think a company shuts down, all those people lose employment immediately. No. If a company shuts down, it's a long process of shutting down, and in most cases, somebody buys up the company. There may be some trimming of employees, etc., that happens in that process. That's true, but the last part of the argument then is the difficult part, right? Which is, so do you want to promote a model wherein everybody's wages keeps plummeting and going down? Not just drivers, of course drivers, but not just drivers. Tomorrow, that person, the person who is making that argument with you, his wages or her wages will be going down, right? Because this model can be moved there, right? So why would you want to do that? I think the important thing is that Uber can go on, new companies will come that will use the technology. We should ask the question, how do you create worker co-ops to expand employment? All of that's up and available for us. We don't need to fall into the trap, scare tactic of, oh, we are going to shut down and everybody's going to lose employment. Now coming to Vagisha's, that's an even more difficult question to answer because frankly, do I have hope for the labor movement? I mean, I am in it, so I better have some hope for it. And I can only say that, yes, UE, United Electrical Workers, I mean, they're a brilliant union. They have stayed true to the course as a radical labor organizing union for the last how many ever years? More than, I would say, 6 or 7 or 8 decades. They've been around for 70 or 80 years. So the labor movement is, I think we should stop thinking about the labor movement as a kind of a monolithic kind of a thing. The labor movement has lost ground, and the Trump administration period has lost further ground, especially because of some court decisions. And so the process of recovery for the labor movement is going to be a longish process. It cannot happen because Biden comes into office or anything like that. It is a longish process of deep down grassroots organizing work, and only that can produce a big change. And frankly, I think many labor unions who are the old traditional labor unions that really did not see, that really went into a certain kind of business unionism, turned into conservative unions over the years.
Yeah, that was
many of those unions are beginning to smell the coffee, right? And they're waking up because frankly, for instance, if you look at the AB5 fight, right? I mean, the unions that everybody thought would not be affected by AB5, therefore they would not have a position on AB5. And if there's a union that technically does not have a position on AB5 or is not affected by AB5, then Uber would have been reaching out to them and trying to drag them to their corner, because then they can pay them a bunch of money and get them to say a bunch of things from labor side, right? But even things like building trades in California, they stood up. I mean, when a business union like the Teamsters really played a somewhat complicated and bad role during the AB5 fight, when the Teamsters tried to sell out the workers, it was the building trades and the UFCW, United Food and Commercial Workers. These are the unions that stood up. I mean, a good old solid union like UFCW is really deeply invested in a fight like this because of Instacart workers, right?
What about SEIU?
So SEIU is the monster in the room, right? We are seeing both tendencies from SEIU, right? In the sense that we have seen a very, very steadfast kind of a support for AB5 from some of the leadership. But at the same time, we've seen, for instance, there is this unit in Los Angeles, SEIU unit in Los Angeles called the Mobile Workers Alliance, MWA, Local 721, if I'm not mistaken. Now, they are the ones, I mean, in New York, here we have a company union. It's called IDG, Independent Drivers Guild. They get money directly from Uber and they do Uber's bidding, right? And they are a union created by the machinists, which is the airline workers, the machinist union, right? Now, Local 721 of SEIU in Los Angeles, way back when the AB5 fight was just beginning to heat up, they flew IDG officials into California and started a backroom negotiation for this Category 3 workers, right? Now this is, so there are these kinds of units. And so SEIU, I must say, is, there have been units of SEIU or certain people. I mean, the problem is with SEIU is that the person who's the worst player, the really nasty villain of this piece, I mean, in the sense that Dara Khosrowshahi, the CEO of Uber, I'm never going to say nasty things about him, right? because he's got a job and he's just trying to do his job, nothing personal. I can't stand him. That's a different matter. I'll fight him, but that's a different matter. But the nasty villain of the piece is somebody like Andy Stern, right? The ex-president of SEIU. He is the man who is negotiating all the backroom deals. He's an Uber consultant for all that we need to know. Right? So that's where the problem is, that SEIU needs to distance itself from people like Andy Stern and all those people who are really screaming and shouting for a third category worker, because they're going to make millions of dollars as consultants and or people who set up these new third category worker funds and benefit structures, right? They're going to make millions of dollars doing that, right? Because they're all now out of the labor movement and they're all these kind of labor entrepreneurs, right? So SEIU really needs to distance itself from these band of bandits. And that's the way to go. I'll stop there.
Maybe we can talk another time, and I'm not sure if this is an appropriate place to ask this, but what would you then advise someone like me who is an SEIU volunteer and recently trained labor organizer under SEIU? Because in Canada, that's where I'm involved. SEIU is taking United Electrical Workers' place to launch Courage to Organize, which is our national labor organizing project in conjunction with Courage Coalition, which is sort of our version of the DSA.
I mean, Vagisha, that's a very specific conversation. We certainly should have it. But my broad thing, anybody says I'm an SEIU intern, I've been training with them, is they are a good unit for that. Get your skill set, then deploy it for the correct politics. All right, so we'll talk.
Okay, thank you.
All right, guys.
All right. If anybody has a question, if not, we passed almost 7:20 now. If no one has a question, I would request Biju give 2 minutes closing arguments and basically why people should vote no on Prop-22.
Yeah, so I'm not going to give you a closing argument on why we should vote against Proposition 22. I think all the arguments are well laid out. The defeating Proposition 22 is not just absolutely central to protecting labor standards in California for gig workers, but it is important for protecting labor standards for all California workers going into the future. So there is no argument in terms of supporting Proposition 22. Anybody who is concerned about any specific worker or the broad class of workers or the working class movement as a whole in both California and the country should be voting against Proposition 22. The ask I have of you is very different. The ask I have of you is, at the minimum, can you take it upon yourself to think about 100 voters in California, each person on the call. Think about 100 voters in California and reach out to them and tell them about Proposition 22 and why they should vote no. And second, if you're interested over the next 2 weekends to making phone calls, doing phone banking, just reach out to me, and my email is my first name, Biju, B-I-J-U, the number 2, the letter U, @gmail.com. Anybody just type it into chat, B-I-J-U, the number 2, the letter U, Biju2U @gmail.com. If you want to get involved in phone banking, etc., on Proposition 22, etc., just send me an email and I'll hook you up with folks inside California. There are multiple phone banks going on. Really, let's all put our shoulder to the wheel and push this one over the damn top. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Biju. Thank you, everyone. With that, so I want to conclude today's session, and I really appreciate everyone staying here. I know a couple of folks joined from East Coast as well. Is already 10 for them. And thank you very much. And let's stay together and defeat Prop 22 with a full force. And with along with that, I also want to emphasize that say proposition 16, you have to say yes. So yes on Prop 16,
Yes
no
to
on
16,
Prop
no to
22.
22.
Yes.